Welcome back to the Peter H channel. Today I'm going to be looking at ivy in your garden. Thanks for watching. Back in the garden for YouTube then. Having a look at the ivy on this fence. On this side you can see a few suckers coming through, sort of about a centimetre. A little bit bigger here. Suckers up from the ground are about this big. On the other side of the fence you can see that big old stump there, considerably older. I'll look down the base of this fence here, and as you can see it's been painted recently, well recently within the last sort of 10 years, and right there coming through the fence, let's get rid of this so it doesn't get a bit, yeah, coming through the fence. If I get rid of that one you'll be able to see it. There we go. Certainly not on the ground, but I mean, you know, it's just a question of cutting off the suckers. I mean, if it comes through the fence, that's only been coming through the fence probably not long after this was painted. If you have a look at the other side of the fence, it's never been painted, so they've never really took the ivy off. So again, down there, just coming through the fence, it's about 1 centimetre across. Just cut it off there. Compare that with the one across over the fence there, which is several centimetres across. That's what happens if you don't trim back your suckers, you see. The best way to trim back your suckers is to have a regular paint regime on your fence. So like if you paint it different colours every sort of 5 or 6 years. If you look at the fence across the other side, on the other side of the fence it's never been painted, so they've never really took care of that ivy. Anyway, save you a little bit of money over 25 years, but what the hell. Okay, so going down to the base of this garden, here is something growing out of the ground. Oh no, it isn't. I thought it was. Well, I'll edit that bit out. No, it's not coming out of the ground. Here, it's coming through the fence. You see that? Like I say, I painted this fence thoroughly about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe longer than that. Judging by the colour fade, it's not that long ago. And I would have stripped off all the ivy back then, dug all this out so I could get down here with a paint can. You know, it's a good idea to have some sort of gap. Got this solid old tamarisk. There's a good gap there, you know. The honeysuckle there, it's been there for as long as I have, 30 years, but I've cut that back to a stump before. So I had to replace the pergola. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so further to the ground, this side of the fence, yeah, there's some ivy growing out the ground here, but look at the width. If we just pull these couple of suckers out, well, they're probably growing off the main stump. Okay, so they're growing off the main stump. Well, look, if you look through above, this thicker one, it's coming from through the fence. It's pushed the fence panel out. You know, there's not a lot you can really say about that. I mean, this one is as old as when the fence got painted. I'll try to pull it out one-handed. I might have to come back on this. Yeah. Okay. This is like the benefit of painting your fence. Okay, so that was coming through the fence, right close to the base of the ground there, take you in there. I mean, it's not growing from this side, you know, it's come through, it's pushed that fence panel out. Let's compare it to the one over the other side of the fence. Yeah, I mean, there you go. That's the difference, you see. You don't take your suckers out, that'll come up as big as that. So that's sort of like maybe 11mm across, sort of finger just covers it with gloves. And the other one is actually I've got the stump of the other one over here. Yeah, so I took this off because I felt sorry for the old person who lived there. And there you go, if you put your finger over that, you can see the size difference. You know, and that is actually ivy. You know, I know it looks like a little oak tree, but that's ivy. Amazing. That's a big old thing. That's what happens if you don't trim your suckers back, you know, and paint your fence regularly. Yeah. Yeah, so like I say, it's just bitch gardening really. Would have done this job in June, but I had to bring it forward. That's a black lace weaver spider there. The parents get eaten by the babies on that one, so that one's, if it survives the winter now, that one will be toast for the babies later. Now that's not all. You don't just see black lace weavers in ivy, there's also house spiders. I'm just quickly looking for one. There was one about, oh, this is going to be a boring bit on the video. There's one. Yeah, so that's not a house spider, that's another one. But like I say, house spiders you find in your house in the autumn, they'd rather be out here in the ivy. So it's a good idea, you know, if you do leave your ivy for a couple of 3 years in between the fence paint job, that's where all your little spiders will go. All the little blue tits like to eat them. That's an immature black lace weaver. That one's going to fatten up and do the business next year. If it don't get eaten, although it probably ain't going to survive the winter now. So I've left all my ivy clippings in a nice little pile here. I'll leave them till all the little creepy crawlies have got somewhere to go for the springtime. Oh. This is how good your ivy can look if you leave it. This has been left for about 2 years and it's nice and dense for wrens and tits and things. If you have a look at the size of the suckers, they're about 1/4 of an inch across, up to 1 centimetre across, mixing my units again, as we like to do here. The danger is, of course, this one's coming through the fence, and so because if you look along the base of the fence, there ain't nothing here growing up. This is where the fence panel is getting pushed out with the sucker that's come through the fence. If it's coming out the ground, they're easy to see, the suckers. When they're coming out the side of the fence and you get a fairly glorious display like this, it is hard to see where the sucker is. So that's what I'm actually going to have to hunt that out, because I don't want to get anything sort of bigger than a finger, because that's hard to cut through with the secateurs that I've got. So I'm going to get back to you, but it is quite a glorious, the birds love it, you know, and there's blue butterflies as well. It's a real home for some insects in there to overwinter. There's nothing coming through the base, so it's hard to see the size of the sucker that's pushed through the fence there. But if I wanted to paint the fence, and I do want to paint it in June, that's all got to come down. So that's about as good as a display of ivy will get before it needs to come down. You know, so it's a shame, but there it is. Unless, of course, you know where the sucker is that's come through, and you can keep that at bay. Because most of these suckers are sort of no more than 1 centimetre. There they are. It's 3 or 4 of them there. Let's see if we can get in there with the camera. 3 or 4 in there. They're all about pencil, less than a pencil. You know, but if you leave it so that it gets as big as that one over there, you know, then that's when you need a handsaw. That's when you're in trouble. You know, your ivy is totally out of control at that point. You know, and if your ivy's out of control, your garden's out of control, your head must be out of control. Do you understand? You know, you've got to keep your head in your garden, you know, otherwise your garden is going to rule you. If your garden rules you, ain't worth living, is it, really? Let's be honest. So just to recap, a good idea to have a regular regime on painting your fence so that you can just get something like a wallpaper scraper, take off your ivy suckers. You know, it doesn't matter, it doesn't actually matter about the root, because any size root, you could have a root the size of a bungalow and it would still push out suckers that big. As long as you stay on top of those, that won't get to those kind of proportions where you'd need a saw. So long as you know, stay on top of your suckers this big, paint your fence, and that's a good way that way you can paint your fence and keep the suckers down. And once you've painted your fence, you can let them kind of give you a display like that, which is great for birds and insect wildlife. And as long, this one's not coming up from the ground, of course. This is from push throughs pushing through the fence. You can see where they've pushed the actual fence through. They're pushing. Anyway, so long as you can keep an eye on where the main protagonist is. But this is about as good a display as you can get before, you know, you want to take that down in the summertime when all the insects are gone, or, you know, can go somewhere. And then you can paint the fence and wait another 2 or 3 years and it'll come back again. There might be 2 different types of ivy here. There's a variegated, excuse that mess down there, I've sort of got a Land Rover on the go as well, which is a different story. Okay, so there's take you through to have a look at the variegated ivy down there, Hedera Helix, variegatus. And then this one here, which is a sort of what I would call Hedera Helix, a regular ivy, with the mature leaves there. Or is that the junior leaf? That's the junior leaf, that's the mature leaf. So it's definitely old enough to have matured there. But like I say, it's not coming up from the ground. I've paved, this is the patio area. And that's push throughs from the fence there. But you can't really let those push throughs get any fatter, because they'll start to permanently damage your fence there. So that needs to be painted, or it would be nice to be painted, because so I've had a new fence put in along here, and there was ivy here previously. And for example, this is a stump of old ivy, and if I zoom in there, you can have a look at the size of the root. Now what I've done with this is just every time you get a little sucker, cut it off, and you know, after about a year, the whole stump is dead. You know. So that is like ivy, it's not infallible to being pruned to death. You just have to be pretty persistent. Like this, for example, here's some, oh goodness me, my camera work. Alright, so here's this, for example. This is new growth of this old stump of ivy. You know, I've just pulled it out. That's dead. But this sort of new growth does persist, and if you want to keep your ivy at bay, just pull it off like that, and you know, it's as simple as that really. You keep your ivy under control and it can be a pretty plant. But let's help with just having a look for some more along this new fence. Yeah, here's quite a mature ivy stump that goes right up to there. I've pruned it with some long handled loppers. I don't actually want it anywhere near my garden, but I mean, I can understand it's quite a nice place for birds and insects. And what I've done is sort of made sure that the ivy is not growing through the fence, and I've got a patio down here. I mean, they'll probably still say it comes from my garden, but this patio's been here for over 20 years. So there's no knowing how old this is unless you were to count the rings at the stump there. And you know, it is what it is. It's ivy, and I keep pruning it off the fence. You know, it's quite a simple, straightforward, routine maintenance job really in gardening. I think that's what postage stamp gardening is all about really. just prune it a little bit at a time. Oh, what? So I'm here in front of another ivy project that this is my little ivy project, and I like to keep that across there. This covers up my utility meters, and right down the bottom, I've been trying to grow this for several years. This is coming out of the ground, like near to the bungalow. This is about 5 centimeters across. It goes up, and it's quite easy to look after. Very slow growing, really. Just use a pair of hand scissors, and you know, when you see a leaf, it's pretty well trimmed this time of year. If you see a leaf, you know, you just cut it off and you give it a little trim up the top like this. Really easy to look after. It's sort of like 2 minutes every sort of 6 months, really. So you know, your ivy, it can look good, can look quite well. I think it looks good. I mean, some people think it looks like a labour intensive thing, but I mean, I haven't really come out here and look at it even. So it's a bit bare there. I'm always in two minds how far across this wall to let it go. It's going off, you know, going off there, isn't it? But you know, maybe just cut that bit off. Oh, let's have a look how deep this is. That's nearly sort of 10 centimeters deep. It's just one big leaf. The actual thing's gripping the wall. Oh, I've broken a leaf off. Bigger than a pencil. I mean, I don't mind how big this gets because I'm going to cap it across the top. So, oh, incidentally, this is north facing, and that's why I chose sort of ivy to go there, because it's north facing. The only other plant I've got really, apart from these little lamb's ears, which are a weed, I've put some jasmine there, winter flowering jasmine. I've got a video on that somewhere in my collection of YouTube videos. And there's some winter flowering jasmine, but this is about ivy. So it's quite safe, I think, to let it come out of the ground like that. It's not particularly invasive if you just stay on top of the little suckers. And the advantage, not the advantage, an example of me staying on top. I mean, obviously some days I had a couple of years where I just didn't do anything, and that's a scar from that. Yeah, but these are the size of the shoots. It doesn't matter how big the base root is, they'll only ever send out tiny little ones like that. And they're quite easy to keep under control.